was doing some meditating today, and ironically, I was thinking about thoughts and metacognition, as it were. Thinking about thoughts came into my mind about thoughts. And it was just suddenly very clear to me just how so often our thoughts are completely useless. Our thoughts are harmful. When I think of my own life and I think of the things that I've struggled with and mental health issues, especially when I was younger, it all rotated around thoughts. It didn't rotate around my actual experience. It rotated around what I thought about my experience and what I thought it meant. I spent a lot of time in my mind trying to understand. And it's taken me a long time to realize that there is no understanding. When you think about thoughts themselves, we have no idea where they come from. They just pop into our consciousness. It's like somebody sending a flashlight into your face, and then they're gone. At least with a flashlight, you know what the source is. Somebody's doing it, whatever. But thoughts, we have no idea the source. We have no idea why they exist. And what are they made of? What are they? Sure, you can put electrodes on your head and you can show the electrical impulses that are happening with thought and what part of the brain. But that's a physical manifestation of a thought. But, arguably it doesn't explain a thought at all. And why a particular thought emerges. And where does it go once it's done? It just goes pop, 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 like popcorn in your head. And unfortunately, part of the human condition is that most of the thoughts tend to be negative. They tend to be anxiety producing. Whether it's regret or fears about the future or planning about the future with all kinds of unknowns, and regret for things that happened in the past, all the would-have, should-have, could-haves, all that kind of stuff. All the self-judgments, all of the self-opinions. For some reason, for most of us, those are typically really negative. Now this stuff emerges in what's called the default mode network. That's part of the brain that functions that when you're not actually focused on something like making a video or whatever, when you're daydreaming, you're mind wandering. That can be a powerful place, especially as a creative person, because you can get all kinds of really cool ideas pop into your head and the rest of it. It has an evolutionary purpose, of course, because it's a very powerful part of our brains. That when you stop focusing on something, we go there and our mind starts generating a reality inside our heads that we tend to put a lot of faith in. Unfortunately, if you spend too much time there, you'll end up feeling, usually most of us start feeling pretty depressed, start feeling low, start feeling anxious, because what tends to bubble up a lot are very negative ideas and very negative thoughts. The whole thing about ruminating, that's just spending a lot of time in the default mode network. So it's generally thought, don't spend too much time there. And yet, our thoughts, by and large, they rule our lives for most of us. And the effects can be pretty deleterious. It really has an impact on people's happiness and equanimity. The thing that Buddhism gives us, the gift of Buddhism, is it allows us to cultivate distance from our thoughts, where we see our thoughts just as phenomena. Just like a sudden sound you hear, well, that's like a thought. It's something that we have no control over, pops into our consciousness, and then disappears. When you think about all the different senses that we have, we don't control what comes into our consciousness, and we don't control when it leaves our consciousness. They just exist, and we're just aware of them. Now, it's just as possible, to look at thoughts the same way that you look at sounds. You just hear something, comes in. Is it important? You can look at it. No, not important. You can ignore it. I'm surrounded by sound right now. I live in Victoria Harbour here, and I hear sound of traffic, and I can just completely ignore it because it's irrelevant. We can treat our thoughts the same way, and most of the time they are irrelevant. Okay, if you're standing in a road and you hear a car coming, okay, that's relevant information, and then you get out of the way. Thoughts are the same way. If I'm thinking of a problem and my thoughts come up with a solution, that's very useful. But the kind of thoughts that just sort of come to us in decision making, when they're just kind of letting it wander around, they can be very harmful. One of the ways that I was thinking about just the other day, I was having a hard time sleeping, and like so often happens to us where we try to go to sleep and our mind is wandering and thoughts are whirling around there, and there tends to be anxiety thoughts when they keep us awake, because it's what am I going to do, what's it going to look like, how will I manage this, all that kind of stuff, which by and large is the best of time is pretty useless, but especially when really you need sleep. So I'm lying there, I'm being kept awake by my thoughts, and I suddenly realized this is ridiculous. They're like gnats buzzing around inside my head, blah, 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 keeping me awake, except I'm doing it to myself. I do not have to pay attention to this. I do not have to give it value. I can just swat it away like irritating mosquitoes, and I don't need to listen. And so I stopped. I just later said, no, piss off. I don't want to hear you. I'm done, And I put it away, and I was asleep in a couple of minutes. And I think it's important that we all cultivate that process, that ability to look at our thought. Is this useful? Nope. Does it make me feel better? No. And we're not talking about delusions here about, okay, I just ran over a cat, but that's got nothing to do with me, so I don't care. It's not about that, but it's about when our minds go to critical places, judgmental places, hurtful places, and then we ascribe tremendous value to them, like our thoughts are coming straight from the Almighty, from a deity thundering down on a lightning bolt, and it has to be absolute truth, when the vast majority of times it is not a truth, it's false, or it's a partial truth. And I would suggest that the vast majority of the time it has nothing, those spontaneous thoughts have nothing to offer us. And when you practice Buddhism, you develop this capacity to have distance from your thoughts, so you can actually, is this objective? Is this real? Is this something I need to listen to? No, this is just bullshit. You can't stop them from emerging, but you can make the distance where you can evaluate them, whether there's something useful for you, and whether or not you can just, like I say, swat them away like gnats. When you develop this ability, you find that there's so much more peace in the world, so much more equanimity, because you're not being ruled by something that you have no control over.